The frail old man shuffled through the glass doors of Elite Warriors MMA, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he gripped his worn gym bag. The fluorescent lights illuminated every wrinkle on his face, every silver hair on his balding head. His faded grey sweatpants hung loosely around his thin frame, and his plain white t-shirt had seen better days. "Excuse me," he spoke softly to the receptionist, his voice catching slightly. "I'd like to try a class today. I heard you offer a free trial session." The sleek, modern gym fell suddenly quiet. Several heads turned. A group of professional fighters paused their training, exchanging amused glances. Jason Mercer, known in fighting circles as the Destroyer, sauntered over. His 6'3" frame, covered in tattoos and rippling with muscles, towered over the elderly visitor. A championship belt was prominently displayed behind him in a glass case. "Hey, Grandpa," Jason called out, his voice echoing through the gym. "I think you got the wrong address. The senior center's down the street." Laughter erupted around them. The old man's cheeks flushed red. "I just wanted to try," he began. "Try what? Breaking a hip?" Jason cut him off, grabbing the old man's arm and feeling the thin muscle. "Look at this, guys. My 8-year-old daughter has more muscle tone." The receptionist looked uncomfortable but remained silent as Jason led the old man toward the main training area, his arm around the elderly visitor's shoulders in mock friendship. "Tell you what," Jason announced to his now gathering teammates, "since we're all about inclusivity here at Elite Warriors, let's give Gramps his free trial. In fact, I'll personally demonstrate some moves for him." The old man stared at the floor. His shoulders hunched forward as the fighters circled him like wolves. What happened next would leave them all speechless. Walter Reynolds had never been one to stand out in a crowd. In his simple cardigan and reading glasses, most people saw just another elderly man quietly living out his retirement years. At the public library where he'd worked for the past decade, patrons would smile politely as he recommended books or helped with research questions, never suspecting the extraordinary life hidden beneath his unassuming exterior. But there had always been something in his eyes, a sharp alertness, a quiet strength that seemed out of place with his gentle demeanor. Those who took the time to really look might notice how he moved with unusual grace for his age, how his hands, though wrinkled, remained strong and steady. Before becoming Richard Arthur Reynolds, the kind librarian who organized community book drives and volunteered at the Veterans Hospital every Thursday, he had been Sergeant Major Reynolds of the 5th Special Forces Group. Those hands that now carefully repaired damaged book bindings had once been lethal weapons, trained in 12 different combat systems across 3 continents. "You know what's funny about Walter?" his co-worker Marla once told a new library volunteer. "He runs this tiny martial arts class in the community center basement. Can you imagine? Our Walter teaching self-defense." They had both glanced over at him, shelving books, and giggled at the thought. What Marla didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Walter's tiny class had saved over 200 lives. It had started small, just 3 veterans with PTSD who couldn't readjust to civilian life. Walter had recognized the hollow look in their eyes at a VA support group. He'd worn that same expression after his second tour. He offered them something the therapists couldn't, a physical outlet for their hypervigilance and a way to feel in control of their bodies again. The Healing Ground project had grown from those 3 men to a network of 14 locations across 5 states. Walter had used his military pension to fund it initially, living frugally in his modest 1-bedroom apartment and pouring everything into creating safe training spaces where veterans could rebuild themselves. Now the program ran on grants and donations, but Walter still personally taught at the original location every weekend. "I don't create fighters," he'd told a rare journalist who'd discovered the program. "I help warriors find their way home." The article had run on page 12 of a local paper. Walter had been relieved when no one seemed to notice it. His techniques weren't flashy. They were practical, efficient, and refined through decades of real-world experience. At 67, Walter couldn't rely on strength or speed anymore, so his teaching emphasized leverage, timing, and the calm mind that comes from accepting one's own mortality. True power, he often told his students, is invisible until it's necessary. When he received the handwritten letter from Thomas Chen, The actual owner of Elite Warriors MMA, who was overseas opening a new location, Walter had initially planned to ignore it. "They've gotten arrogant," Thomas had written about his fighters. "They're bullying beginners and forgetting what martial arts are truly about. They need the lesson only you can teach them, old friend." Walter had almost thrown the letter away. His teaching days were long past, at least in public, but something in Thomas's words had stirred a responsibility he couldn't ignore. Some lessons could only be learned through experience, and Walter understood he might be the only one who could provide it. So here he was, deliberately playing the role of a feeble old man, while Jason Mercer's mockery washed over him like rain. Walter noticed everything: the fighter's overconfidence, his poor footwork, the way he telegraphed his movements for the crowd's benefit. Most importantly, he noted the absence of respect in the young man's eyes. As Jason guided him toward the mats with exaggerated care, making a show of the senior citizens first class, Walter caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. For just a moment, beneath the carefully constructed facade of frailty, the warrior he'd always been looked back at him. "It's been a while," Walter thought to himself as Jason began demonstrating a simple takedown, intentionally moving in slow motion as his friends snickered nearby. But some things you never forget. The gym's atmosphere had transformed into a circus, with Jason Mercer playing ringmaster to the elderly man's supposed humiliation. Fighters stopped their workouts to watch the spectacle. Phones appeared to record what everyone assumed would be comedy gold. No one noticed the subtle change in the old man's breathing, the way his stance shifted almost imperceptibly as Jason placed a condescending hand on his shoulder. "Now, Grandpa," Jason was saying, his voice deliberately loud for his audience, "fighting is probably a lot different from when you were young. Back in the Stone Age, did you guys just throw rocks at each other?" Or the laughter echoed off the walls. A young woman at the edge of the group frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before her. She stepped forward, about to intervene, when something unusual happened. "Actually," Walter said, his voice suddenly clearer and steadier than before, "I do have a question about that takedown you showed." "Sure, Pops," Jason grinned, winking at his friends. "What's confusing your senior brain?" "I was wondering," Walter continued mildly, "if it works better before or after this." What happened next occurred so quickly that many would later argue about the exact sequence of movements. Walter's hand found Jason's wrist. There was a subtle shift of weight, and suddenly the champion fighter was airborne. Jason hit the mat with a thunderous impact that silenced every voice in the gym. The wind knocked completely from his lungs. Before anyone could react, Walter had smoothly transitioned to a ground position, his bony knee pressing precisely against Jason's sternum while the younger man's arm was extended in a textbook armbar. The hold wasn't punishing yet, but the message was unmistakable. "Tap," Walter suggested quietly. Jason's face flushed crimson, embarrassment quickly transforming to rage. He bucked and twisted, trying to use his superior strength to escape. Walter adjusted his grip slightly, applying just enough additional pressure to send a jolt of pain through the younger man's elbow joint. "Tap," Walter repeated, a teacher's patience in his voice. This time Jason slapped the mat furiously. Walter immediately released him and stood up with that same unnerving grace, offering a hand to help his opponent up. Jason ignored it, scrambling to his feet. "Lucky move, old man," he snarled, rubbing his arm. "Let's go again." The circle of fighters had gone completely silent, their expressions a mixture of shock and growing intrigue. The woman who had been about to intervene now leaned forward, her eyes narrowed with analytical interest. "That wasn't luck," she said suddenly. "That was a perfect execution of—" "Nobody asked you, Alicia," Jason snapped, cutting her off. He turned back to Walter, circling him predatorily. "Come on, Grandpa. Beginner's luck runs out fast around here." Walter stood calmly at the center of the storm, his hands relaxed at his sides. For a brief moment, indecision flickered across his face, a moment where he seemed to ask himself whether this lesson was truly necessary, whether there might be a gentler way to teach what needed learning. Then, Jason charged, and the time for such questions passed. 5 minutes later, Jason had been taken down and forced to submit 7 times, each technique more effortless than the last. The gym had fallen into a stunned silence, broken only by Jason's increasingly labored breathing and the soft, precise instructions Walter offered with each demonstration. Trap the arm before bridging. Mind your base. Protect your neck. Sweat poured down Jason's face as he lay on his back, the old man's forearm gently but immovably pressed against his throat. This time he tapped immediately. "I believe that concludes our free trial session," Walter said, standing and straightening his simple white t-shirt. "Thank you for the workout." The gym remained frozen in disbelief as Walter turned to walk away. It was Alicia who broke the spell, stepping forward to block his path. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice filled with newfound respect. "Who are you, really?" For those watching, the moment seemed suspended in time. The simple old man who'd been mocked and ridiculed now stood transformed, not by any physical change, but by the sudden recognition of what had been there all along. Several fighters had quietly pulled out their phones, searching for information. That might explain what they'd just witnessed. "I'm just someone who's been at this a very long time," Walter replied with a gentle smile. "Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers." "Wait," called out a fighter from the back, staring at his phone screen. "Are you Walter Reynolds? The Walter Reynolds who trained with Helio Gracie in the 70s? Who developed the ground combat system for special forces?" A murmur spread through the crowd. Even Jason, still catching his breath on the mat, looked up with widening eyes. Walter's expression remained unchanged, neither confirming nor denying. But something in his posture shifted subtly, a soldier's bearing briefly visible beneath the librarian's humility. "The techniques aren't important," he said. "What matters is why we use them and the respect with which we train." From the gym entrance came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. A distinguished Asian man in his 50s stood watching, an enigmatic smile on his face. "I see you got my letter, old friend," he said. Walter nodded. "Hello, Thomas." The owner of Elite Warriors walked forward, bowing slightly before embracing Walter. "I apologize for the dramatic setup, but some lessons need to be experienced rather than explained." He turned to address the stunned fighters. "Many of you have been wondering why I left an MMA champion in charge during my absence instead of a proper sensei. Now you understand. Pride comes before the fall, literally, in Jason's case." Jason had finally regained his feet, his usual bravado entirely absent. He approached Walter slowly, rubbing his elbow. "Those submissions," he said, his voice quiet. "I couldn't feel them coming at all. 32 professional fights and I've never—" Walter nodded. "When you've been in real combat, where mistakes mean death, you learn to make your intentions invisible." Thomas placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "Everyone, this is Sergeant Major Walter Reynolds, my first teacher. Everything I know began with him. More importantly, every ethical principle this gym was founded on came from his example." The gym had fallen completely silent. Every fighter present now looked at the unassuming old man with new eyes. "If I may," Thomas continued, "I'd like to formally invite Walter to join our teaching staff, focusing on ground techniques and the mental aspects of combat." The fighters erupted in approval, with several calling out questions or offering belated apologies for their earlier behavior. Even Jason, his face still flushed with embarrassment, had the grace to look ashamed. While Thomas quieted the excited group, Walter stood slightly apart, his expression thoughtful. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be. Like returning to the world of formal training, passing on his knowledge to a new generation of fighters. The respect in their eyes was certainly tempting after years of being overlooked and underestimated, yet something held him back. The veterans who came to his basement classes didn't need another fighting instructor. They needed someone who understood the deeper battles they fought every day, the invisible wars that continued long after they'd returned home. When Thomas turned to him expectantly, Walter shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, old friend," he said quietly. "But my teaching days in places like this are behind me. There are men and women waiting for me who need what I can give them more than your fighters do." Thomas didn't seem surprised. "The Healing Ground Project? I should have known you'd still be running it." "Some promises don't expire," Walter replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by Jason, who had approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. The champion fighter stood awkwardly, Humility, an unfamiliar garment he was still learning to. "Where, sir?" he began, struggling to find the right words. "I was wondering, those veterans you mentioned, do they ever need, I don't know, someone to help? Maybe hold pads or something?" Walter studied the younger man's face, looking past the tattoos and bravado to something genuine beneath the surface. "As a matter of fact," he said, "we're always short on training partners." And in that moment, in the space between a fighter's arrogance and an old warrior's wisdom, something important changed. Not just for Jason or Walter, but for everyone watching. A lesson had been taught that went beyond submissions and takedowns, beyond techniques and training methods. It was the oldest lesson in martial arts, yet the one most easily forgotten. True strength often comes in unexpected forms, and genuine power carries itself quietly. The following Saturday, 3 professional MMA fighters, including Jason Mercer, showed up at a rundown community center to assist with Walter's veterans program. They arrived expecting to teach, but left having learned far more than they gave. And Walter? He simply continued as he always had, moving through the world with quiet purpose, his extraordinary capabilities hidden beneath ordinary appearances, helping broken warriors find their way back to themselves, one technique at a time. Perhaps the greatest triumph wasn't on the mats of elite warriors that day, but in the subtle shift of perspective that rippled outward from it. For in witnessing strength that required no validation, power that sought no recognition, everyone present glimpsed a truth easily overlooked in today's world. Sometimes the most remarkable people are the ones we never notice at all. The story of what happened at Elite Warriors spread quickly through Chicago's fighting community, though Walter himself never spoke of it. Some claimed the old man had submitted Jason 20 times in 5 minutes. Others insisted he'd been a secret government super soldier. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between these colorful exaggerations. What couldn't be disputed was the change that followed. Jason Mercer, who had once been the embodiment of arrogance, now began each class by having new students partner with experienced ones, ensuring no one felt unwelcome or inadequate. The culture at Elite Warriors transformed, from one of intimidation to one of mutual growth. Walter's Veterans Program received an unexpected surge of volunteers and donations, anonymous at first, until Thomas Chen publicly pledged a permanent space for the Healing Ground project in his new facility. "The measure of martial arts has never been in victories," Walter told his veterans during their next session, several MMA fighters now sitting respectfully among them. "It's in how the practice transforms you as a person." Among those listening was a young Marine, just 3 months back from his second deployment, his eyes carrying that 1,000-yard stare Walter knew all too well. After class, the young man approached hesitantly. "Sir," he said, his voice barely audible, "they say you can help when nothing else does." Walter placed a weathered hand on the young man's shoulder. "The path back isn't easy," he replied, "but you don't have to walk it alone." As they talked quietly in the corner of the community center, Jason Mercer watched from across the room. Seeing Walter's gentle guidance, the champion fighter finally understood what had been missing from his own training all these years: the connection between physical technique and human compassion. In the weeks that followed, Walter continued his simple life. He recommended books at the library on Mondays and Wednesdays. He had coffee at the same corner shop every morning. He visited his wife's grave every Sunday with fresh flowers, and twice a week he taught men and women whose greatest battles were fought not in rings or cages, but in the quiet hours of the night when memories returned. He taught them not just how to fight, but how to find peace within the storm of their experiences. The lesson he delivered at Elite Warriors was really quite simple. True mastery shows itself not in domination, but in service. Not in seeking recognition, but in recognizing where your gifts are most needed. It's a lesson present in every tradition across history, yet one each generation must discover anew. That beneath appearances lie depths we cannot fathom. That the most powerful forces in this world often move unseen. That an unassuming old man in worn sweatpants might carry within him a lifetime of wisdom, waiting to be shared with those humble enough to receive it. As for Walter, he neither sought nor wanted recognition for what he'd done. At 67, he had long since learned that respect demanded through force never lasts, while respect earned through character endures beyond a lifetime. And so he continued his quiet work, changing lives one gentle lesson at a time, his extraordinary capabilities, visible only to those who needed them most, a living reminder that we never truly know the battles others have fought, the wisdom they've earned, or the help they might offer if we approach them with an open heart. Perhaps next time you pass an unassuming, elderly person on the street, you might wonder, what remarkable life have they lived that I know nothing about? What wisdom do they carry that I might learn from? What strength lies beneath the surface that I fail to see? For in the end, Walter's story isn't just about martial arts or respect or even teaching arrogant fighters a well-deserved lesson. It's about remembering that each person we encounter carries within them an entire universe of experiences we cannot see, and that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who never feel the need to tell you how extraordinary they are. In a world that increasingly values appearance over substance, noise over depth, and attention over impact, Walter Reynolds serves as a powerful reminder. True strength doesn't need an audience. True mastery speaks for itself. And true warriors often walk among us unrecognized, their greatest victories won in battles we never see. Let that be the lesson we carry forward. Not just to look twice at the unassuming elderly person at the gym, but to approach everyone we meet with the humility born of knowing that appearances rarely tell the complete story. For in that recognition lies the beginning of wisdom, and perhaps, if we're fortunate, the path to becoming a bit more like Walter ourselves. This story reminds us to look beyond the surface, to question our quick judgments, and to treat everyone with the respect they deserve, not because of what we can see, but because of what we cannot. For sometimes the most powerful people in the room are those who have nothing to prove. If this story touched your heart, there's another journey waiting for you just a click away, a tale of unexpected courage that will leave you breathless and believing in the extraordinary potential hiding within ordinary lives.